Well, Rhonda, thank you so much for taking some time to hang with us today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my deep pleasure.
Yeah. So today we're talking all about fear, which I know you like to talk about.
Oh, I do.
And I know there are a lot of people that I come into contact with that would say, I'm not a fearful person. Like, I don't
Ah,
live in
mm.
fear, right? I'm not paralyzed by fear. I think we oftentimes think of somebody that's like huddled in a corner, maybe, like in a fetal position, thinking that they're, full of fear or something. What would you say to the person who would say, I don't have fears. Maybe I have fear of heights or spiders or snakes, but
Mhm.
I'm not a fearful person.
I would say congratulations, first of all. Congratulations. Wow, that's amazing. And I would say, I would say two things. So I'm going to take it two different ways. First thing I would say is I never thought I was either, because I was never a person that said I'm afraid, ever. I never said I was scared. I don't remember a day in my life that I said, before I discovered fearless living, where I would say I'm afraid or I'm scared. So I would say, yeah, I'm totally get it. I'm just like you. I didn't think I had any fears either. And then I would say, and so I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. Do you mind if I just check you to see
Oh,
if
geez.
you have
Okay.
any
Sure,
fear?
sure, sure.
Okay. So, do you ever procrastinate?
Yeah. Okay.
Get
Yeah.
perfectionism, get overwhelmed,
Yes.
anxious,
Yes.
comparing,
Yes.
competing, right?
Yes.
Judging, right? And I
Yes.
could go on, overwhelmed,
Yes.
right? Irritated,
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
disappointed, right?
Yes.
Right. So I usually give people, it's like 30, 40 question quiz,
Okay.
depending on where I am.
Sounds like I got 100%. I got an A
Yeah.
plus.
Well, most people get at least 80%.
Okay.
And when I do it, I mean, there's literally like 30 or 40. I'd be happy to do it if you'd like, but it's just like, procrastination, perfectionism, overwhelm, comparing, competing, etc. And 99% say, well, yeah, I do that. I go, well, you don't procrastinate unless there's a fear underneath. You're
Okay.
not a perfectionist unless there's a fear underneath. You don't get overwhelmed without a fear underneath, right? You don't get anxious without a fear underneath, right? You don't compete without a fear underneath. You don't compare without a fear underneath. You don't judge without a fear underneath. So all the behaviors that we are not proud of, things that we go, I got to change it about myself. I hate that I'm so comparing. I just hate it. Or I just hate when I judge others. Like we all want to become more evolved and loving and inclusive. And the fact is that what we blame ourselves for and beat ourselves up for are really the symptoms of a deeper fear.
Okay.
So people go to perfectionism class, or they go to, procrastination class, or they go to overwhelm class, and they're really just moving the chairs on the Titanic, because fear doesn't care how it stops you. It doesn't care how it stops you. It doesn't care. It doesn't care if you procrastinate or you're a perfectionist. It doesn't care. So go fix one. And you and I both know that we're old enough to know that if you solve one problem, it seems another problem pops up. Is that not true?
Right,
Right?
right, right.
So these are all just symptoms of fear. And most people, when they come to me, just like you said, David, well, I don't have a lot of fear. And I go, well, that's fantastic. Awesome. Are you living the life that is meant for you? Are you living the life your soul intended? Are you living it fully and completely as best you can be to human being? And usually they're like, well, I could, I don't know. Right. And so, people, again, I never walked around saying I'm afraid. But when I started recognizing that all my quote unquote problems that I thought were wrong with me,
Sure.
that I would beat myself up about or put myself down about, were really just symptoms of fear. And I was just changing the chairs on the Titanic instead of actually dealing with the source. And that became my life's mission, is to understand how fear actually plays out in human reality.
Now, what would you say are the most common fears that you deal with as you're working with clients?
Well, I have something that I created called the Wheel of Fear, and everybody has a unique Wheel of Fear, and there's 4 components of the Wheel of Fear. So, everybody's fear is a little bit different, has a little different taste, because our fear was developed by the time we were 5 years old. So, a lot of people have the fear of failure, the fear of success. These are I want to say the fear responses. People come to me and go, yeah, well, I have a fear of failure, I have a fear of success, I have a fear of I have fear of rejection. Everybody will admit that one, right? Oh
Hmm.
yeah, I hate being rejected. And I say, of course,
Hmm.
who does, right? Nobody likes being rejected. So those are the fears people admit. But really deeper fears are the fear of loss, the fear of incompetence, right? The fear of being unlovable, right? The fear of being a disappointment. So there's deeper fears that are underneath the fears that people will readily admit, like fear of failure, fear of success, and fear of rejection.
Fear of rejection is way easier to say than fear of being unloved or unlovable. Like that feels so intimate.
But see, you're getting to the point, David, right? So fear of rejection is not really addressing the core issue, right? It's not really what's happening. It's, again, just a symptom. So yeah, fear of rejection is, we all can be like, oh yeah, who likes to be rejected? And salespeople can be like, oh God, rejection. You have to go through 100 rejections before you get the sale. And so we're trained, we're trying to be trained that, like, oh, you should be okay with rejection. You should be okay with rejection. And on some level, yes, we all need to be, quote unquote, okay with, quote unquote, rejection, because it's actually not real. But what's really, oh gosh, I am so sorry. I forgot to turn that off because everybody is calling about that thing that just happened.
Yeah, no worries.
But unlovable, like you're saying, David, is way like, what? But that rejection is really just, again, a symptom of a deeper fear that we're unlovable, incompetent, that we are, for a general conversation, just that we're not good enough.
Yeah, it seems like all of those fears come back to the root of, there's something wrong with me.
That's right. Yeah. And there is nothing wrong with you. And that is my life's mission. You just hit my life's mission. My life's mission, if I could say one thing to people and have them really get it in their heart and know it like the back of their hand, would be, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just fear. And, I spent most of my life beating myself up and trying to, I shouldn't judge. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that. What's my problem? Why can't I be? Why? What's my problem? I'm so, And again, not that I don't want to refine those things and I don't want to, grow as a human being, but I just spent so much time and thought I had so many problems and so many character flaws, or so many limitations or so many weaknesses or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's how people walk around. They actually think there's something wrong with them because they procrastinate. They think there's something wrong with them because they don't like to be rejected.
Yeah. Part of it's just part of the life, part of fear, part of the experience.
Part of the experience. And you can move beyond it. I mean, that's my whole work is in Fearless Living, is to move people from fear to freedom. And people just stay on the surface and deal with, again, the chairs on the Titanic rather than dealing with what's really going on.
Right.
And once you deal with that, I don't even say deal is really not the correct word, because it's not dealing with it, it's embracing it. And when you embrace it and understand it, then I have something called the Wheel of Freedom that helps you access all those parts of yourself that you've hidden, denied, ignored, pretended weren't there, afraid that were there, right?
Obviously all the conversations that I have with women on our podcast flow through my life experiences, the questions and everything. And so one of the things you may or may not know about me is I was a Christian pastor for over 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the things that really, that I've unpacked over the last 11 years of not being in full-time ministry is that so much of the Christian spirituality and church is rooted in, there's something wrong with you.
That's right.
You are a sinner and you are in need of God's grace and Jesus dying on the cross, right? All this stuff. So the thing that I'm challenged with by that is so many churches, even if it's subtle, continue to tell you every Sunday, even through the songs, that there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And so I really just don't resonate with that, anymore. And not that I don't have faith, I do. I would still consider myself a follower of Jesus. And yet what you talk about in that, there's this freedom of saying, there's nothing wrong with you. You are beautiful. You are wonderfully made. Yes, we all have challenges. Yes, we're all growing. But I'm finding that message is so much more liberating for me, right? For the people that I coach, for my kids.
Sure.
And that we do have this feeling of we're not enough. We have these problems, but that message of that you are loved, you are enough, you are okay, we're growing, we're changing. I got to tell you, Rhonda, that stands in direct opposition to everything that I have been taught, as part of that faith.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, do you find that, I don't know, do you find that faith is a challenge for people that you coach, or is that not, or, I don't know.
I was going to be a minister when I was younger.
Okay.
And I actually was in ministerial school
Mm-hmm.
when fearless living came through me, because I do believe this is a gift from God. I don't believe that I like created this all by myself. I believe
Yeah.
that God was answering a deep cry in my heart, right?
Mm.
So, and I remember the day that I really got it, and I was sitting there with one of my clients. I was working with somebody. I wasn't a coach yet. I was in public relations, and I had a client who was a trainer and actually one of the first coaches ever in the world. And he and I are sitting in his office, working through some issue. And I had what could be called a mystical experience, or who knows what you want to call it, but I call it a mystical experience. And basically, to the right of me, right up here, the world opened up. It's like heaven opened up, and like a book came out and went like this, and then shut and went away. And I was like, what the hell just happened? What the heck just happened? Oh my gosh, what just happened?
Yeah.
And what happened is that I was literally downloaded the answer to every question I'd ever asked. And inside that message was inherently, oh, well, Rhonda, I'm giving this to you, but you don't have to go teach it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, I am not, I'm not worthy of this. Like, I can't do this. And it took me many months to embrace what was gifted to me. And, obviously God keeps working through me and helping me refine the message, et cetera. But I, like you, I always had to fix myself, right? Now, this is where I go with God, and I do sermons. I love talking about God and fear. The thing is that I think there's a disconnect for most people, just like you're talking about, but the disconnect even when you're talking about, oh, you're loved, you're whole, you're good enough, right? All those things. Yeah. The disconnect is that you still need skills.
Sure.
Yeah, but most people don't get that. So most people walk around, are told that they're loving, oh, you're loved and you're good and you're perfect as you are.
Yeah.
And then they don't actually understand why they're still having problems, or why still thing isn't quite working, because they're not going to get the skills they need.
Right.
So it's not that you're a sinner and don't get skills, and that you're loved, you need skills.
Right.
So to become in this world, to show up as God intended, i.e. more loving, more expansive, more inclusive.
Sure.
That just doesn't happen like because you want to be more loving. You actually have to be refined. You're just like a diamond, right? That has to be chipped away. And you also have to be added to in the sense of skill. So I think one of the big things that I find when I go into spiritual homes, i.e. churches, et cetera, is that there's not enough skill building. Right. So people are walking around. I don't care which church you go to. Yes. I don't care if you go to a new age church that talks about you're loving, or I don't talk about, or the church that you're saying, like, you're a sinner. I've been to both. I go to both. I get the message of both.
Yeah.
But they're not really. And that, I think, one of the benefits, like actually Joel Osteen, I always say, is a little bit more of a coach than a minister, because he actually will say things, but we all need skills. And just telling you to be nicer to people isn't actually a skill. Right. It's a concept.
Yes.
But I spend most of my time, David, when I coach, doing role plays with people. How do I tell that to my mother?
Yeah.
How do I say that to my boss?
Sure.
How do I can tell you all day long to go and be nice. I can tell you all day long to go be loving. But unless you work through that and understand what that really looks like and sounds like,
right,
you are most likely never going to do it in the way that you cry for, and you're still going to beat yourself up because you're like, I know I should be more loving. I know I should be more loving, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I really tried. And I have a client who's, trying to be more loving, and she has conflict with her mother, and she doesn't know. I had to teach her, train her, support her in understanding how to hold herself solid in the face of her mother and be loving at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't think people don't know that. People don't talk about it. People don't teach it.
Okay, so this is amazing. So my wife is a kindergarten teacher. She has embraced a way of doing things called conscious discipline. And it's a certain way of, molding, shaping, and helping kids.
Uh-huh.
And so much of elementary school teachers have a treasure box. If you perform a certain way, then you get to go visit the treasure box, which is a bunch of, dollar store crap. And so she is just going through, she just finished summer school. She had a student in her class that's very challenged, and the parents are saying, you can't go to this movie if you don't have a good day, right? So it's all punitive. And my wife, she deconstructs this stuff at home, processing it. And she said, they don't understand that it's not about punishment or reward. It's about the fact that he's missing skills.
That's right. He's missing skills.
Missing
That's
skills.
right. That's right.
Yeah. He doesn't know how to regulate his emotions.
That's
He doesn't
right.
know how to regulate his body.
That's
and he
right.
doesn't know how
That's
to
right.
process. And
That's
so
right.
when they hear, the parents hear counseling, they think, oh, he's going to have to lay on a couch and deconstruct, his 5 years of life. When she's saying, no. Counseling at that age is literally role play, teaching the child how to interact with his or her peers.
Yes.
How to have a conversation. Yeah. So I love what you're saying, that it's like, okay, you've got to be told that you're loving, you are complete, you are whole, you are beautiful. But at the same time, you're growing, you're changing, you need skills. And
how do you express beauty? How do you express love? Right? How do you do that? I remember my niece, she had I think her son at the time maybe was 3 or 4, maybe 5, really little. And he was holding something, really precious. He picked something up on the shelf and she says, don't drop it. And I said, how does somebody not drop something? How does somebody not drop something?
Yeah.
So you're not teaching him how to hold it.
Right.
I said, sweetheart, so you need to say, hold it gently, hold it with 2 hands, right?
Right.
You need to tell people how to do something, but instead we go, don't drop it.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I hear is drop it.
Well, exactly. And that's what our conscience hears too, right? That's how our brain works. But the point is that what we're doing is we're telling people not to do something rather than telling them what to do. And so I spend 99% of my time talking to people about what to do. I don't talk about what not to do. I never tell somebody not to do something. That's a waste of time. Instead, you want to tell them what to do. So they start doing that replacement. So they start understanding, oh, in this situation, I want to move that glass object from here to here. It's not, don't drop it. It's more like, okay, hold it with 2 hands.
Right.
Does it need bubble wrap? Right. Like there's a lot of things to think about in order to get that object safely from, the table to the couch.
Sure.
But because just like your wife is experiencing in kindergarten, parents have never learned it.
Right.
So then they just demand good behavior. Right. But they don't understand that to get somebody from here, like you're saying, you have to teach them how to regulate their emotions. You have to learn how to speak up. You have to let them understand who they are and what they're feeling, and their feelings are okay.
Yeah.
So, but most parents don't have that skill. So your wife is working with the mothers of the children, the fathers of the children, right? Or the caretakers of the children. Yeah. And I'm working with the parents.
Yeah, right. That's so good. So good. Okay. So back to fear. When I'm having, whether it's perfectionism or procrastination or comparison or, all of these things that are rooted in that I'm not enough, I'm feeling less than, maybe you won't love me, whatever. How does that fear work inside of our brain? Like, help me understand how that is bouncing around inside of there.
Well, let's just say a couple things about how the brain works. Number one, the fear, actually, let's just say that fear and the brain and our whole body system, our neurobiology wants to keep us safe. So that's the first and foremost thing. We are meant to survive. Now, this is how the brain works. The brain doesn't know the difference between an emotional fear or a physical fear. Okay. It doesn't know the difference. So we all can relate to, oh, I'm afraid of heights. And we all get that as a survival mechanism, right? We can logically all get that, right? Oh, that's scary. That's a survival mechanism. I don't want to fall. Okay, got it. But that same thing in the brain is actually happening on an emotional level. The brain doesn't know the difference. So if you haven't dated for 20 years, if you have weight that you haven't let go of or released for, 5, if you have never asked for a raise before, if you've never changed jobs before, if you've never moved, right? Anything that's new or different, that is literally to the brain and body, depending on your abilities, like being on a high building and jumping off.
Yeah.
So again, people don't equate them the same. They think like, oh, well, I mean, I very rarely come across somebody who's like, well, I'm afraid of spiders. Like we'll admit our phobias, i.e. in the heights and spiders and snakes. But what people don't get is that emotions are the exact same thing. Our risk taking is the exact same thing. That's how our brain works. So we are literally meant to survive. We are literally meant to stay safe. So our body and brain will invent anything it needs to get us to stay stuck, safe, and small, because that's the only way it can guarantee our safety. So another way to think of it is, I have survived this long, right? I've survived this long. So clearly what I've done in the past has worked to keep me in survival, not happy, not joyous. Fear doesn't care about those things. That's not what it's about. It only cares about survival.
Okay.
So you can talk to most people our age, David, and they're like, I keep doing the same thing. I keep doing the same thing. Because fear's like, yes, and you survived. That's awesome. Look, we did it.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, fear's job is not to make you happy, joyful, peaceful, graceful, easy. It's to help you survive.
Okay.
So that's one thing about the brain.
All right. So go ahead. Keep going. Yeah.
I was just going to say another thing about the brain is what they're discovering, which is really cool, is that they're starting to discover that fears are handed down through our DNA.
Yeah. Tell me about, I don't like this. I hate this.
Yes, but this is the thing. You can transcend them. Just because you have a fear that's been handed down to your DNA, I like to think of it this way. I've had fear handed down through my DNA, and I am choosing to be the place that it transforms so that my cells and my DNA shift, right? We are knowing it through epigenetics, right? That word that I can't pronounce right now. We know that we can change our DNA. We're highly aware of that now, right? Like every piece of our DNA has 6, 8, 10 ways that it can transform, that it can show up. So through our choices, our DNA will show up a certain way. So just because your fears are handed down through your DNA does not mean you're a victim of them. Does not mean you're a victim of it all. It's like, oh, okay, I've been handed down intimacy issues. Got it. I can look at my history. I can look at my grandma. I can look at my grandpa. I can look at my mother. I can look at my father. I can look at the people that I know that are alive in my lifetime. I can go, makes sense. And then people think, they walk around thinking, I'm not going to be like my mom. I'm not going to be like my dad. And then they don't go learn skills, and they just try to, again, push against it rather than learn a new way of being, which, oh, by the way, is going to wake them up and make them become more of who they're meant to be. But that takes effort, right? It takes a willingness. It takes a surrender. It takes all those wonderful qualities of release and letting go and claiming. So the brain is in complete alignment with one, to keep us safe. That's its number thing. So when I always say this, if anybody ever says to you, you're never going to fear, you work with me and you'll never fear again. I always say, when's the lobotomy? Because that's not even how we're wired. That's not the point. It's not about, I want to get fearless so I never feel fear again. That's not the point. The point to get fearless is to start understanding how you work. How do you process your fear? How do you work when you're feeling fear of rejection, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of incompetent, right? All those fears come up. What do you think? What do you feel? What do you do? And how can you transform them? And where's your access point out? Because your access point, David, may be different than my access point. So that's the whole point of a Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom, is that I'm going to show you how you work when you're triggered. I'm also going to show you how to move out of it so you can move out of it.
Nice. Some of our listeners will know that 11 years ago, I had a kind of meltdown myself, and I had a brain scan through the Amen Clinic, Dr.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And they do a measure of the activity level of your brain.
Yeah.
And the 3 areas of my brain that they pointed out, one was my basal ganglia was at a +4. They have a +4 to -4 system, +4 being like super overactive, off the chart. My cingulate was at a +2, and then my prefrontal cortex was at a -2. So
okay.
yeah, I'm in good shape.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. So, but what was great
not in good shape. -2.
They said, so when somebody brings you negative information, you probably either want to really amp up or run away, fight or flight, because I'm at a -4. And, I can point to multiple times when I've had negative information, I will literally have a jolt of energy flow through my body. That's not a positive jolt, right? It's not a like, ooh, that felt good. It is a adrenaline jolt
Yes.
that I didn't ask for, right? It just
Yes.
bam shows up.
Yes.
And obviously that's a triggering, experience.
Yes.
And, I've had to learn how to process those things
That's
and,
right.
how to deal with that. And,
And how to love it.
well, it provides energy. You know what I mean? It
Right.
definitely, because I'm an action taker. So
Mhm.
it motivates me to take action in ways. But you do have to learn many skills. So one of the things that I want to
Can I
hear
just
of, yeah,
can I just jump in? Sorry, I just want to
yeah,
say
of
one
course,
thing about what you just said, and then I'll definitely want to hear the next thing you're saying. Is that, my company's called Fearless Living Institute, FLY, the acronym FLY. And how I really use the acronym FLY, Fearless Living Institute, is frequency, length, and intensity. And when you start understanding how you process, the frequency in which you get triggered will decrease.
hmm,
The length it lasts will shorten, and the
ah,
intensity will minimize.
nice,
So it's not about, oh my God, I'm never going to get triggered again. It's more like, oh, I'm getting triggered. Oh, and I know now what to do about it.
sure,
So it's not about never happening, but it's about becoming aware of how you work. And then the key is knowing what to do when you are triggered,
sure.
right?
Yeah, that's great. I was just, as you were talking, I was like, okay, when was the last time I was triggered? And I was kind of triggered last week about something. And the great thing was I was on the phone right after that with a very close friend that it would be appropriate for me to talk to,
Mm-hmm.
about that. And I processed with her. And
Mm-hmm.
afterwards I, felt great. And she even gave me other, perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is learning how to process those things, who's appropriate to process with, all of that. So good. But I want to hear why you've gotten into this whole passion about fear. Like, what's the
Mm.
story behind this? Because you talked about kind of the sky opening up and a book being downloaded, but
Yeah.
there's got to be more to your
Oh,
background.
definitely.
So
Yeah,
give me a little history there.
definitely. You talked earlier about thinking something's wrong with you. I was going to be a minister, as I shared with you. I um, love God. God's awesome. And when I was 14, I had just announced to my parents I was going to be a minister. And my parents had recently separated. And it was Father's Day. And my father was coming over to take us to brunch. And I was pretty excited. I hadn't seen him for a few months. And my parents were going through a difficult divorce, right? I mean, this is in the nobody gets divorced phase of our world. Like, you don't get divorced, right?
Was
And
faith a
so,
part of your family life, I
yeah, we went to
assume, or?
church every Sunday. I actually started the youth group in my church. So there was no youth group. I started it. So yeah, I sang every in the choir. I sang every solo in the church. I sang at every
Wow.
wedding, right? So the church was definitely a huge part of my upbringing.
Yeah.
And so, me to say I'm going to be a minister, I was that girl who would knit scarves and then stuff the box with Jesus pamphlets.
Yeah. And that's unusual to think that you would be a minister as a female in that time period. Like that's
Oh,
that's a unique thing.
that's right. I remember my mother, because my mother always used to say to me, well, you're going to be a minister's wife. Because I
Oh
loved the church so much.
man.
She goes, you're going to be a minister's wife and you're going to be in charge of the choir. Because remember, I was in the choir. I sang every solo, right? So she goes, you're going to be the choir director and you're going to marry a minister. And then, like I said, 3 to 4 months before this event I'm about to share with you, I said to my mother, I'm going to be a minister. And I remember her saying, oh my gosh, you're going to be a minister? I
Yeah.
mean, she was so proud that
Wow.
I would have the courage to even claim that, right? To
Yeah.
even say that I was going to be doing that.
Yeah.
And then it was, so a few months went by, told my mother, told my father that I'm going to be a minister. So I was feeling really, I would say that was the happiest time in my life, because I was
Mm.
so connected to God and so feeling like I was on my right path.
Yeah.
Like I know who I am and I know what I'm going to do, per se,
Mm.
at 14 years old, of course. And it was Father's Day. My father comes over to take us out to brunch. We grew up in a little tiny town, and you don't go out to brunch. So, 3 kids, 2 adults, 5 people. That's a lot of money. But this was a special day. So my mother made me a brand new dress. My mother sewed all of our clothes. And my father comes in because he's staying at his mother's house, come on, let's go, let's go. My two sisters are fighting it out in our one bathroom. And my mother is looking at me like, be nice to your dad. And I'm like, okay. And so me and my mom start walking out. My sister's still in the bathroom fighting it out. And my dad says, let me go get my coat from the car because it started sprinkling. And this coat was a tan Naugahyde leisure suit coat. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Naugahyde, fake leather. And my mother with her beehive hairdo. And so my mom and I start walking out. My dad opens his trunk to get his coat, and my sister's still in the bathroom fighting it out. And as my mother and I walk out of the house, my father with the trunk open doesn't grab a coat, but he grabs a gun and he starts screaming, this is your fault, this is your fault. And he fires and he shoots my mother. And I start screaming, what are you doing, Dad? What are you doing? Stop. And he cocks the gun and he points it at me. And I absolutely think I'm next. My father strangled me when I was 12. So I absolutely thought he was going to kill me. And then with my mother's literal last breath, she screams, no, don't. My father, realizing my mother is still alive, takes that bullet intended for me and shoots my mother a second time. And that second bullet goes through her abdomen, out her back, lands in the car horn. And for the next 20 minutes, all I heard was, eh. And then my father comes right next to me, like literally he slid. It was, I think about it today and it's just, can't believe how graceful he was. He cocked the gun while he was running, landed on his knees, put the gun to his head and fired. So in a matter of 2 minutes, probably 2 minutes, I was the sole witness of watching my father murder my mother and commit suicide in front of me. And, the first thought that went through my brain in that moment, the minute the deafening silence happened and I was still alive and my parents were dead, or I didn't know it at the time, but bleeding in front of me with bullets, this is a really big test, God. God doesn't, and then, the thought, God doesn't give you a test that you can't meet, right? And that's the first thing that went through my brain. This is a test from God. God doesn't give you a test that you can't, overcome. And I remember thinking to myself, this is too big of a test, God. And I ran into my mother's room, got on my knees and prayed to God and said, please, God, keep my mother alive and I will do your bidding. I will be a minister. I will live my life for you. But if she doesn't, I don't know if I can. And so my parents did die. And I never got mad at God. I just put God over there, right? Like, because no, too big of a test. I'm 14 years old, for God's sake, right? So I put God over there. I stayed over here and basically put a line between the middle of me and God. And for the next 20 years, where
did you go to live? You had two other sisters?
We stayed in that house, David.
How were your sisters?
I was 14. One was just had turned 18. Okay. I was 14 and my little sister was 13. And nobody came. Nobody helped us. Relatives didn't help us. Back then, there was no, victim funds or anything like that.
Yeah.
This is an example of my relatives. And again, I love my relatives and I forgive my relatives and I understand that they didn't know what to do either. Again, they didn't have any skills. They had zero skills. There was no skills where I grew up or in our family.
Yeah.
So, but example is my uncle just a few years ago said to me, Rhonda, where did you girls live after that?
No.
And I go, Uncle.
Way.
Yeah, I go, Uncle, we lived in that house for 2 years. Well, I called once.
Oh my goodness.
But this is where we lived. This is the time we lived in, and this is where we lived. So, I was a straight A student. Like I said, I was a choir soloist, all those things. I mean, I was still a straight A student afterwards, but I basically became the daughter of that family, right? Became that family, right? And so if your father kills your mother, then there's something wrong with you too. And my mother had told me growing up all the time, you're just like your father. So David, I actually became afraid of myself. Yeah. I was petrified of
Yeah.
myself.
Mhm.
I was petrified of feeling. I was petrified of getting angry. I was petrified to I was petrified of me,
Mhm.
because if my father could kill and my mother kept telling me I was smart like my dad and I'm just like my dad, then I don't know what I'm capable of.
Sure.
And I think this is true for so many people, that I remember feeling for so many years that, they're like, oh, you just need to get your anger out. And I'm like, if I got angry, I would destroy the world.
Yeah.
Now, logically, I know that's not true, but that's how it felt inside of me. It
Right.
felt like I would destroy the world. So what does a person who's stuffing their feelings and denying all this horrible stuff that happened to them? I started drinking in college, became an alcoholic, tried to kill myself 3 times, got 3 DUIs.
Mm.
And
I assume that the suicide, you say that, like you just like, hey, I tried to kill myself 3 times. Well, okay, cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like those are 3 seasons of life
yes.
that were just full of depression, I assume, and just utter hopelessness.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for 20 years after my parents died, their death overshadowed everything,
Mm.
right? Because I didn't save them.
Mm-hmm.
I was the only one out there, David, and I did not kick my dad. I did not grab the gun. I did not step in front of my mother. I did nothing to save her. And that guilt and that shame and that embarrassment and humiliation and all the things you want to name it was who I thought I was, right? Because I didn't save my mother, I absolutely didn't deserve to be happy. And if you remember, I was the happiest I'd ever been before they died. So also happiness was a trigger for me that something bad was about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So if I even allowed myself to be happy for a second, then something bad was about to happen. Otherwise, you can't be happy anyway because you watched your mother die. You don't get to be happy. You didn't save her. That's not for you.
Sure. Did you
Now,
tell this story like in those 20 years, or did you
are
just
you
keep
crazy?
it
Are you
private?
crazy, David?
Yeah, I
What, are
assumed you
you
would keep it private.
nuts?
Yeah, it's not like, hey, you meet a potential partner. Hey, by the way,
Okay.
this is what happened to my family.
God, no, David. No, no, no. I remember the very first time I said it out loud to somebody, and then I said it out loud to a group. I remember very distinctly those first times. But for most of my life, for those 20 years, I would never talk about my parents, one.
Mm-hmm.
And then if somebody brought up parents, especially in college, I'd be like, oh, they're both passed, or like, where do your parents live? Oh, they're both passed. Oh, both of them? They'd be like, yes. They'd always say this, always, David, accident, car accident, an accident. And I mean, because they both died, right? So they always assume accident.
Right.
An accident? And I always go, yes, an accident. And then in my brain, because I can't lie, David, I literally cannot lie. So what I do in my brain in that moment, I used to go like, well, my father accidentally bought a gun and he accidentally loaded it and he accidentally shot my mother and he accidentally killed himself. Like I would tell myself,
sure.
Yeah. That's because I could not say, oh yeah, no, my father murdered my mother and committed suicide when I was 14 and I was the only witness. People would be like this.
Yeah. Well,
I
that
mean,
kind of ended the party.
Well, yeah, I mean, and when I did start sharing it even a little bit, 90% of the time in the beginning, because I didn't know how to share it, people got worried about me, or people were in their shit about it. Excuse my language. In their crap about it, they were triggered, so they were upset, right? So then I ended up taking care of them, right? So I was either taking care of them, which was exactly what happened on the day they died. I actually went skating that night. I went skating every Sunday. This was a Sunday, so I decided to go skating. And all my friends came, of course, and they didn't know I was going to be there. And then all of them cried and were like, oh, I can't believe this happened. Ah. And I sat on the bench holding them all and saying, it's okay.
Wow.
So, so I had to learn. It took me 20 years. And that third suicide attempt, David, I realized I'm not very good at killing myself and I got to figure out another way. And that was really when I said to myself, I have to start over. I have to literally start at the beginning. I do not know how to be me. I don't even know who I am. And that's when I started with a bunch of gold stars and a calendar. And I went back to kindergarten. I actually said to myself, David, what would I do if I was in kindergarten? And I got calendar and gold stars, and I actually have it in my office right now. I still have it, which I'm so proud of. And I wrote down anytime I did anything good, anything at all, and put a gold star next to it, because I had to find out if I was worth saving. And the things, David, on that calendar are like, got angry, but didn't destroy anything,
Yeah, didn't punch him in the throat.
Felt rejected, but wasn't devastated, went to my, counseling session, said I was hurt, right? And I did for 30 days. And after 30 days, I had a calendar full of stars. And I knew, David, that I had hope, that there was hope for me, that there was hope for me.
And obviously, over the many years past that, you've developed this life calling and message to help people, and with what you call fearless living. And so what does that mean? Do you mind pulling your hair back from your mic on the right hand side just a little bit? Yeah, there you go. So what does it mean to live fearlessly? What does that mean to you?
Well, I always say fearless living isn't about jumping out of a plane. It's about jumping into life, right? It's be willing to face yourself, i.e. love yourself, care for yourself, nurture yourself, discover yourself. Fearless living really is about how to understand yourself so that you know how to process fear and move into your wholeness, move into a sense of freedom for yourself. So that for me is fearless living, because once you understand how you process, and that's really, I focus on that a lot. Once you understand how you process information, once you understand how that works for you individually, because everyone's different, then you have a choice inside of that process to stop it at any time. Once you're awake to it, you can stop it. When you're not awake to it and you're beating yourself up, you just beat yourself up some more, because you shouldn't beat yourself up, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're feeling rejected, you don't know how to switch that, because you think I shouldn't feel rejected. I see, then I'll just stuff it and forget it. It's like, no. We don't stuff, we don't ignore, we don't run, we don't disengage. We actually have another pathway, which is again called the Wheel of Freedom. So for me, fearless living really is about deeply being willing to love yourself, embrace yourself, trust yourself, build the skills necessary for you to live the life your soul intended.
Awesome. I know that you have a resource that you want to make available for people to help them begin to develop some of these resources. What is it, and how would it benefit them?
Oh, absolutely. I would be happy to. This is I want to give them something called Stretch, Risk, or Die. Yes, stretch, risk, or die, David.
Okay.
Because as you're moving through fear, you're going to have to stretch. You're going to have to take risks. And there are going to be times that you feel like you're going to die, but trust me, you won't. And I'm actually going to teach you the process of how to basically put your to-do list away and start taking action from using this model called Stretch, Risk, and Die. So you can start seeing why you don't do A, B, and C. So, everybody has their to-do list, right, David? On scale, they have 10 things on their to-do list, and everybody does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, skip 6, skip 7, do 8, 9, skip 10, right? And then you put 6, 7, and 10 on the next day to-do list, right? And it's like, I'm going to do those today. And then it skips again, right? And it keeps skipping. And then you beat yourself up. Why don't I do this? What's my problem? Why? Well, Stretch, Risk, and Die is going to explain the why. I'm going to talk a little bit about fear in this course. And you're also going to learn a method to start being able to take action that you want, that maybe you've been frozen about, frightened about, fleeing from, the freeze, fight, flight, and fright, right? So starting to move beyond that so that you can actually start taking action to live the life your soul intended. So this is really going to shatter your perception of it being your fault, and give you a tool, and more than one tool actually. And it has also templates and worksheets that you can use, so that you're going to start having an understanding about how you work.
Awesome. Stretch, risk, or die. And they can get that at fearlessliving.org/risk. Fearlessliving.org/risk. And we'll of course make that in the show notes. If you're watching or listening on your Apple podcast app, you can swipe up and it'll be right there, the link in the show notes, or you can go to our website if you can't get that, and we'll have all that in the show notes. Fearlessliving.org/risk. Rhonda, this has been amazing. You are a rock star.
Oh, you are so
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah. And I love your glasses. I love the artwork. I love the artwork behind you is
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank
Last
you.
question. Last question. What is the tattoo on your left wrist and
Mm.
why did you get it? Yes.
That's
Oh,
fearless.
fearless. It
It
says
says fearless.
fearless.
It says
That's
fearless,
obviously.
and I just actually got it a few years ago.
Okay.
And I was very ill over the holidays, and it was New Year's Eve, and one of my dear friends came over and said, "Come on, I'm going to go get a tattoo." And I've been thinking about getting a tattoo, but I'm not a tattoo person. I mean, I'm from
Sure.
Upper Michigan, Upper Minnesota, so
Yeah.
you don't do that. So she goes, I haven't been out for like a week because I've been sick, and so I go to the tattoo parlor with her. And by the way, don't go to a tattoo parlor unless you're willing to go get a tattoo, right? So I had been thinking about this tattoo, and I'd actually been writing it on a napkin and thinking about what I wanted to look like. So I was
Yeah.
actually in the creation stage.
Okay. Okay.
So then my friend comes over and goes, "Let's go." And I'm like, "Okay." And next thing I know, I have a tattoo. But it was so funny, David. This is the funny part about it is when I'm leaving, the guy goes, "Well, see you next time." And I said, no. One, I don't do tattoos, and I'm never getting another one. This is already freaky that I have it fearless. And I have it on my wrist because, I've tried to kill myself many times. So I want to remind myself to stay
Yeah.
alive. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he goes, yeah, but nobody has one tattoo. And I went, what? So I go to bed that night, David, and his words are in my brain, like, nobody gets one tattoo. And I thought to myself, well, if I did get a second tattoo,
Sure,
what would
sure.
I get? And David, I have letters that my mother wrote. So I have her handwriting. So I have decided, and I don't know when I'm going to do it. I haven't done it since I got this tattoo. It's been a couple years. I haven't felt moved to do it, but I do know if I do get another tattoo, I'm going to take the words, letters in my mother's letter and, trace them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to trace the words, "I love you, Mom."
Mm-hmm.
And I think about if I had that tattoo, "I love you," that would be pretty amazing in my mother's handwriting. But I haven't felt moved to do it yet. But that is my next tattoo, David.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and inspiring us to live fearlessly.
Oh, thank
And
you, David.
we'll make sure that everybody finds their way to your website, fearlessliving.org/risk. So thank you, Rhonda.
You're welcome, David. Thank you.